ready to dive into some social psychology, but through a pretty unexpected lens. You ready for this? We're talking werewolves.
Werewolf.
Werewolves, yeah. Specifically, we're looking at this paper by Andrew Kulpa. He argues that werewolves, that game with hidden roles and deception, well, he says it can be a really insightful tool for understanding how we interact in groups.
It is fascinating how werewolves, with its simple premise of villagers versus werewolves, it basically becomes this like microcosm of social dynamics.
Right.
Players are just thrust into this world of suspicion and uncertainty, and then they have to make judgments based on limited information and navigate these complex social pressures. It's really something.
Okay, so for anyone listening who maybe hasn't played, you've got these villagers trying to identify and eliminate the werewolves, who are hiding among them, obviously. And then the werewolves are trying to survive, by blending in and, picking out villagers one by one at night. But one thing that really stood out to me in Kulpa's paper was how he highlighted the immediate impact of just assigning roles. Like even before the game really starts.
Oh, yeah.
The simple act of being handed a card. Werewolf, seer, villager. It instantly shifts the whole dynamic and how players perceive each other.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that makes werewolves such a powerful teaching tool. It allows you to actually see these social psychology concepts in action. Instead of just reading about them in a textbook.
Oh, for sure.
Take the seer role.
Oh, yeah. Good example.
They get this crucial information each night about someone's true identity. And Kulpa observed that this creates a fascinating dilemma for them. Do they reveal what they know and risk becoming a target? Or do they stay silent and potentially allow harm to come to the village?
It's a tough one.
It's like that whistleblowing scenario, right?
Yeah.
You see it play out in real life all the time. You have this insider knowledge, but speaking up could cost you. It really makes you think about the weight of information and the difficult choices people in those situations have to face. Exactly. And Werewolves also forces players to grapple with deception and perception. You're constantly trying to figure out who's being truthful and who's manipulating the group just to survive,
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to see how people rely on these subtle cues.
Like what?
Like body language, tone of voice, even just the way someone constructs their arguments, just to try to figure out their true intentions. Really, it's amazing what people pick up on.
You mentioned Kulpa observed students picking up on really nuanced behaviors. Things like a slight hesitation in speech or avoiding eye contact. It makes you realize just how much we rely on those nonverbal signals to interpret social situations, even if we're not consciously aware of it.
It's almost like a real-life lie detector test, but without the fancy equipment. And just like in real life, our perceptions can be flawed. Sometimes we're spot on, but other times we misinterpret those signals and we're totally misled. Kulpa noted some instances where a student just radiating confidence and sincerity, managed to convince the entire group they were a villager, all while orchestrating their demise behind the scenes. Come on, that's good.
That is a perfect example of how the game highlights those real-world dynamics of persuasion and manipulation.
Yeah.
You see those same tactics used everywhere, in politics, advertising, even in our personal relationships. It makes you wonder, how often are we swayed by a charismatic personality or a well-crafted argument, even when the underlying intentions aren't so pure?
That's one of the core elements of Werewolves that makes it so captivating and insightful. It throws you into this environment where those social dynamics are amplified, where you have to make these snap judgments and weigh the consequences of your actions, all while knowing that not everyone is playing by the same rules.
And then there's the whole element of group decision-making, which Kulpa observed was particularly intriguing. During the daytime, the villagers come together to decide who to eliminate. What really struck me was that they sometimes choose not to eliminate anyone, even when there's all this suspicion swirling around. It just seems counterintuitive when you're trying to root out the werewolves.
That's what makes it so fascinating, right? This choice, which seems totally illogical on the surface, actually happened quite frequently in the games Kulpa observed. And it reveals a lot about how complex group decisions really are in the real world. We're not always rational actors. Even when we're faced with a clear threat, fear and doubt and social pressure can lead to paralysis or inaction,
So why would the villagers choose to do nothing? Is it like Fear of making the wrong call, or a lack of consensus, or maybe even like a strategic gamble, hoping to gain more information. What do you think?
Culpa suggests it's often a combination of factors. I mean, there's the very real fear of eliminating an innocent person, especially when the evidence is largely circumstantial. Then you have the dynamics of group consensus. Individuals may hesitate to voice their suspicions if others aren't expressing similar concerns. They might doubt their own judgment, thinking, well, if no one else sees it, maybe I'm wrong. That kind of thing.
It's like that classic conformity experiment, right? Where
Yeah.
people go along with the group even when they know the answer is wrong, just because they don't want to rock the boat or be perceived as different.
Exactly. And in werewolves, that pressure to conform can have very real consequences. Holding back a crucial piece of information or dismissing your intuition because you don't want to stand out could be the difference between winning and losing. Or in this case, surviving or being eliminated.
It's like Culpa says, werewolves is a microcosm of our social world, this place where trust, deception, and the power of persuasion are constantly at play. And what I find really interesting is he doesn't tell the students the exact number of werewolves in the game at the start.
Right. That's a really clever way to make the experience even more like real-life social situations. It forces them to rely on their own observations and deductions rather than just working with a set formula. They have to pay attention to the interactions, analyze the information they have, and then make judgments, even though they're working with incomplete data.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle where some of the pieces are missing, right? And you have to figure out not only what the picture is, but also which pieces are the ones you need to find.
That's a great analogy. It really speaks to the complexity of social dynamics. We're always trying to make sense of the world around us, piecing together information, interpreting behaviors, and then making decisions, all based on what we perceive, even though we know that our perceptions could be totally wrong.
So far, we've seen how werewolves acts as a microcosm of our social world, where trust, deception, and the power of persuasion are constantly at play. But Culpa's analysis goes deeper than just those surface-level observations. He delves into specific strategies players use and the psychological factors that drive their decisions. We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Welcome back. So, let's dig a little deeper into some of Culpa's research and see how werewolves really brings those social science concepts to life.
You mentioned earlier that Culpa doesn't reveal the exact number of werewolves at the beginning of the game. What other aspects did he kind of zero in on?
Well, one thing he really emphasizes is that role reveal element.
Okay.
You know when a player is eliminated, and their true role is revealed to everyone.
Right.
Well, that provides immediate feedback and allows everyone to reflect and analyze what just happened.
It's like a debrief after a social interaction.
Yeah.
You finally get to see how your perceptions matched up with reality. You can look back and be like, oh, that's why they were acting that way.
Precisely. And in a classroom setting, it's this really valuable opportunity for discussion. Students can analyze why they made certain choices, how they interpreted the behavior of others, and how those hidden roles influence the overall dynamic.
There must be some real aha moments in those discussions.
Oh, absolutely.
Students probably realize their own biases or assumptions totally led them astray.
Culpa observed this happening all the time. Students would suddenly see how a seemingly innocent comment or a particular pattern of voting was actually a really clever tactic by a werewolf to deflect suspicion. It encourages self-awareness and critical thinking, which are essential skills for navigating complex social interactions. I mean, beyond just the game, obviously.
It's like learning to read between the lines, not just in the game, but in real life, too. Makes you think twice about how we form judgments about people, especially based on very limited information.
Absolutely. And it reinforces the importance of questioning assumptions, considering multiple perspectives, and just being open to the possibility that things might not always be as they seem. You just never really know.
Speaking of questioning assumptions, what about the game master? The person who's facilitating the whole experience. I imagine they have a pretty big impact on how the game unfolds.
Oh, for sure. Culpa actually dedicates a significant portion of his paper to discussing the game master's role. He argues that they're not just there to enforce the rules, they're also responsible for creating this learning experience for everyone. And they need to be super mindful of their own actions, avoiding any unintentional cues that could influence the player's decisions.
It's like being a neutral observer, like a scientist carefully documenting the behavior of their subjects, but also kind of a guide, helping the students connect the dots between the game and those broader social psychology concepts.
Exactly. It's a very delicate balance. You want to encourage students to think critically, and draw their own conclusions. But you also want to give them that framework, the vocabulary, to understand those concepts more deeply.
So it's not just about playing the game, right?
No.
It's about using it as a springboard for deeper learning and reflection.
Culpa sees werewolves as a catalyst for discussion, a way to spark curiosity and engage students in a way that traditional teaching methods often don't.
I totally get that. Think back to my own education, and the classes that really stuck with me were the ones that went beyond lectures and textbooks, the ones that let us participate and experience those concepts firsthand.
Learning by doing, experiencing those social dynamics firsthand. And it's not just about understanding abstract concepts, right?
Right.
It's about developing actual skills that you can use in real-life situations: critical thinking, communication, negotiation, persuasion. The list goes on.
Culpa highlights a particularly interesting example. This student, despite having really flimsy evidence, managed to convince the entire group to vote against an innocent player.
Oh, wow.
It shows how persuasive techniques, whether intentional or not, can really manipulate those group dynamics, even when the facts aren't clear.
It's a great example. And it's a good reminder that we're all susceptible to these influences, whether we realize it or not. And that's really where the learning comes in, becoming more aware of those dynamics and being able to recognize them when they're happening around you, and then, developing strategies for how to deal with them effectively.
Makes you wonder how much of our daily lives are actually influenced by these same social forces. We make decisions in groups all the time.
All the time.
At work, in our families, even with friends.
And just like in Werewolves, those decisions are often shaped by things that are way beyond logic and reason. Emotions, biases, power dynamics, social pressures. They all play a part in how we interact and make choices.
Culpa also points out that Werewolves encourages something that's often overlooked in traditional learning: observation. And not just watching what people do, but actively listening to their arguments, noticing how they interact with each other, and even paying attention to those nonverbal cues.
He observed that students who were more attentive observers tended to be much more successful at the game. They were better at identifying the werewolves, building alliances, influencing the group's decisions, just better all around.
That's fascinating. It's like you're a social detective, right?
Yeah.
Piecing together clues from people's behavior just to uncover their hidden motivations, it's a real skill.
And those skills aren't just useful in a game. I mean, they're valuable in any situation where you need to understand people, build relationships, or navigate complex social situations, whether you're in a business meeting or a social gathering or even having a conversation with a friend. Those observational skills can make a huge difference.
So we've talked about the role reveal, the game master's role, and the importance of observation. Anything else from Culpa's research that really stood out to you?
Yeah, he spends quite a bit of time on the practical considerations of using werewolves as a teaching tool. He provides guidelines for different class sizes, suggests seating arrangements to create the best environment for observation and interaction, and even outlines the order of actions during the game. I mean, he really thought of everything.
It sounds like he really put a lot of thought into creating a structured learning experience, not just a fun game night.
Oh, absolutely. He stresses the importance of scaffolding, providing students with support and guidance throughout the whole process. This might include pre-game discussions about social psychology concepts, prompts for taking notes during the game, and then, of course, those post-game debriefing sessions to analyze what happened and connect it all back to those concepts. So it really is a learning process.
I like how he integrates the game into a bigger learning framework. It's not just about playing for fun, right?
Right.
It's about using that experience to really understand the concepts and, spark those critical thinking skills.
Culpa is part of this growing movement that recognizes how much potential games have for education. Games can really engage students in a way that traditional methods often struggle to do. And it taps into that natural human desire to play, to explore, making learning fun, interactive, and memorable.
I'm already thinking about how I can incorporate some of these ideas into my own work. And honestly, who wouldn't want to play werewolves as part of their job?
Well, it's not just about the fun, although I have to admit that's definitely a bonus. It's about realizing that learning can take many different forms, and that playfulness can be a really important element in engagement and comprehension.
That's so true. It's about challenging those assumptions about what learning should look like and embracing those unconventional approaches that can really make people think and have those aha moments.
Exactly. Sometimes the most effective learning experiences are the ones that surprise us, the ones that push us outside of our comfort zones, and the ones that make us see the world in a whole new light,
This deep dive has definitely done that for me. We've uncovered how a seemingly simple game can reveal so much about human behavior. And, the complex dynamics of social interaction. We'll be back after a quick break to wrap up this really fascinating conversation. Welcome back. It's amazing to me just how much we can learn about ourselves and how we interact with others, all from analyzing a game like Werewolves.
It really does make you realize even activities that seem simple on the surface, they can actually give us these really profound insights into human behavior and the lessons we get from werewolves. They go way beyond the game itself.
For me, one of the biggest takeaways is just how much our perceptions and even the decisions we make are influenced by things we might not even realize are happening. Those little biases we all have, the pressure to conform, the way we interpret information. It's all going on under the surface, shaping how we interact without us even knowing.
Yeah, it's like we're all playing this giant game of werewolves in real life, right? Always trying to figure out who we can trust, who might be trying to manipulate us, and whose motives actually line up with our own. And just like in the game, we're making judgments all the time based on information that's incomplete, trying to read between the lines and, make sense of those subtle cues.
It really makes you realize that being a critical thinker is so important, not just when you're playing a game, but in all parts of life. We need to question our assumptions, be aware of those potential biases, and really, really think about the information we're given before we make a decision.
Coupa really stresses self-awareness as like the first step. If we can pay attention to our own thoughts and feelings, recognize how our own past experiences might be coloring how we see things now, and just understand what triggers those emotional responses, we can start to navigate these really complicated social situations a lot better.
It's like we have to take a step back from ourselves and become the observer,
Yeah.
right? Like watch ourselves playing the game and notice those moments where we might be jumping to conclusions or letting our emotions get in the way of our judgment.
Exactly. Once we can recognize those patterns in our own behavior, then we can start to make better choices about how to react in those situations. It takes practice, but it's worth it.
So, okay, besides self-awareness, what are some other tools or strategies that we can use to get better at navigating this social world?
Well, being a critical consumer of information is crucial. We're just bombarded with messages all the time from every direction. It's really easy to get caught up in a persuasive argument or an emotional appeal without thinking too hard about it. But if we can slow down, take the time to think about the evidence, consider different points of view, and then form our own opinions, well, that's how we start making good judgments.
So it's a lot like those villagers in Werewolves.
Right.
They have to think about all the different things they're hearing, decide if those speakers are credible or not, and then finally choose who they believe. It's like they're constantly sifting through information and trying to figure out what's true and what's not.
And it's not an easy job, especially when you're dealing with people who know how to manipulate others or people who are straight up trying to mislead you. But the more we practice those critical thinking skills, the better we get at spotting those warning signs and making informed choices.
Playing Werewolves really does sound like training for those real-world social skills. You have to think strategically, communicate well, and just be more aware of all those things that are going on beneath the surface, shaping the interactions.
It's a really useful tool for building those skills, but it's important to remember that it's just one piece of the puzzle. The real learning happens when we take those insights and use them in our daily lives, when we're more aware of how we're interacting with others, and when we're making conscious decisions about how to handle those tricky social situations. That's where it all comes together.
Culpa's research has definitely given us all a lot to think about. I don't think I'll ever play Werewolves the same way again.
It's a good reminder that even the things we do for fun can teach us something. Sometimes those big aha moments come from the most unexpected places.
So for those listening who are thinking, hey, this idea of using games to learn about human behavior is really cool.
Right, yeah.
Where should they go to explore this more?
Well, there's a ton of research out there now about the educational side of games, and there are a lot of resources available both online and in libraries. And of course, the best way to learn is by doing. Grab some friends, get a Werewolves game, and see what you discover.
Great suggestion. And I think we could all agree that a little more fun and games in our lives is never a bad thing.
Absolutely. It's good to remember that it's okay to be playful and to explore, to stay curious and never stop learning.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you've learned some interesting things and maybe even found a new way of looking at the power of games and how they can help us understand the complexities of human behavior. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and of course, keep playing.